Hello and welcome to Chapter 22, The Ordeal of Reconstruction. America got wrecked by the Civil War, had to rebuild it 1865 to 1867. This is silly. This is silly. But this is America. Not the Childish Gambino song. The Gambino song. But this is America. Civil War. Reconstruction. Have to put it back together. That's all you really need to know there. We're done. Move on. Video over, right? Sorry, that was the stupidest analogy I've ever seen. Usually in my classroom, I put up a chair and then I karate chop it, and then build it. But anyway, Reconstruction. So kind of complicated here. There's actually three parts to Reconstruction. There's Lincoln's plan, and unfortunately, tragically, as you know, he's assassinated. Then you have President Johnson's plan, which doesn't really get totally fulfilled. And then you have the radical Republican plan. The reason why this is a big deal is the legacy of Reconstruction lasts for 100 years. The reason there's a civil rights movement in the 1960s is to correct the wrongs and the errors of Reconstruction. The great people like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks and Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael and Bob Moses, all because of Reconstruction failing. And it's really an overlooked period in American history. There's only one major book written about it, modern book by Eric Foner, a really good author. So let's look at this. So the war is over. So what do you do with the Confederates? They have committed treason. They have committed the highest crime possible against their country, which is punishable by death. Well, President Johnson answers that. He pardons all of them. Doesn't mean that they get off scot-free. It just means that they're not going to be tried for treason. They're not going to be hanged. They're not going to be executed, but they don't have civil liberties. They're not allowed to vote. They can't run for office. There's some other things going on there. The South is in ruin, so you got to rebuild the South. Also got to rebuild their economy because it can't be just based on cotton. The price of cotton fluctuates too much. Boll weevils can wreck it. That's a bug. It actually took until 1870 for cotton production to return to 1860 or pre-Civil War levels. You also have to deal with $2 billion of investment in slaves is gone. With African Americans being freed, there's no gradual compensated emancipation, like many abolitionists had been arguing for. That basically, let's free the slaves slowly and pay the owners compensation for this. That money is gone. That's more money invested than anything in the United States. A slave back then cost about $850 in their money, which is over $20,000 in our money. That's a lot of investment that's gone from the South. Culturally, the South's just not ready to change. There's some bitter feelings, some hard feelings that have to be settled. This is what it looks like in Charleston, South Carolina in 1865. And if we took this boy out of the picture, or maybe even with the boy, you might think this is France, 1945. You might think it's Germany, 1946, something like that. So emancipation took an effect unevenly in different parts of the conquered Confederacy. After the Emancipation Proclamation, as the Union armies went through the South, they liberated slaves. And so some slaves were freed at different times in different parts of the whole Confederacy. Some slaves actually resisted the Union because they were loyal to their masters. There was a strong bond, almost a kinship. Almost they were like members of the family. And so they didn't want to be freed. They didn't want to break away from their families that they cared for. Many just took off and went on the road and tried to search for a new life. In fact, years later, 25,000 exodusters moved to Kansas. This is a whole group of African Americans who went to Kansas in 1878 to 1880, named after Exodus, the book of the Bible where Moses frees the Jewish slaves from Egypt and leads them to the Promised Land. And so a lot of them, they moved on. It was tough. Kansas isn't a great place to live. It's flat. Kansas. So many of them actually went home. A lot of them stayed too, though. And so for them, the bedrock, the thing that they can hang their hat on, that they know is something that they feel safe, is the church. It's the institution that really brings the Black community together. It's the focus of the Black community life in years following their freedom. Blacks form their own churches, and really that is the centerpiece of African American culture. There's also opportunities for education that are opened up because the Black codes are taken away. The idea that you can't teach a slave to read and write anymore, that's gone. This is actually a freedmen's school. The title of this picture is Educating Freedmen and Freedwomen from 1870, which we'll get into here. So before Lincoln was assassinated on March 3rd, 1865, the government established the Freedmen's Bureau. This was an agency aimed at helping African Americans transition from being slaves to being freed men. General Oliver O. Howard heads it. And so they help them make that transition. They gave out food, they gave out medical supplies, they gave out clothing, basic necessities. They also established schools for all generations, which I think would be a really fun TV sitcom. Imagine being in school and your siblings are there, your mom and your dad are there, your grandparents are there, your aunts and uncles. Kind of think of that, and you're trying to flirt with a girl your age, and grandpa is embarrassing you, grandma's cheating off your tests, and you're just trying to learn reading and writing. I think it'd be funny. Maybe they pitch it to Netflix. They'll pay us $1 million. They also helped freedmen acquire land. Most of the time, they didn't give out enough. There was once a proposal, I think it was by General Sherman, to give out every freed slave 40 acres and a mule. Never really comes to fruition. They also helped whites get labor contracts, and so the whites need workers, and so they were the go-between to hire freed slaves to go work for wages. Johnson despises it and lets it expire in 1872. The thing about President Johnson is he hates Southerners. He hates the elite Confederates, but he also doesn't like African Americans. He's virtually a racist. He's just a jerk. I'm not sure he likes anything. So here's President Johnson. He grew up extremely poor, extremely impoverished, orphaned. He worked as a tailor. He is from a typical rags to riches story. He despises the elite, the aristocratic men of the South that saw themselves as cavaliers, that saw themselves as this planter class, that they were the aristocrats of our country, and he didn't like that. He resented them. He was a self-made man. He wasn't born into his money like, Johnny Reb over there, and, Granddaddy didn't give him a plantation. He made himself who he was. When Johnson was in Congress, he refused to secede with his own state. He was the only loyal senator who stayed with the North. He's a Democrat. Remember, Lincoln put him on the ticket because he thought he was going to lose the election of 1864. He tried to bring in war Democrats and pro-Southern elements from Southern Indiana, Southern Ohio, Southern Illinois. He is a strong supporter of states' rights. He's a strong supporter of the Constitution. He resents and loathes slaveholders. He wants to punish them. He also doesn't desire to help blacks. And so that's really a tough place to be to help rebuild the country if you have that much hatred. So this is crushed by the Constitution. The little boy would persist in handling books above his capacity, and this was the disastrous result. So Lincoln, before he died, in some places he did get to put in his plan called the 10% Reconstruction Plan. His is the most lenient of all of them. States could be reintegrated to the Union if 10% of their voters took an oath of allegiance to the United States and pledged to abide by emancipation. So freeing of the slaves, immediate, no compensation. New state governments had to be formed, and then the state would be readmitted to the Union at that point. It's pretty easy. He was trying to reconcile, trying to heal the nation. He's trying to reach out to them, trying to rebuild the United States, not wanting to punish them. Congress, in reaction, didn't like this. They passed the Wade-Davis bill in 1864, which was going to require 50% of the state's voters to take the oath of allegiance. They had stronger safeguards against to support emancipation. Lincoln simply pocket vetoed it, which meant that Congress gave it to him with less than 10 days left in their session. So under the Constitution, the president can literally or figuratively put it in his pocket and not act on it, and it doesn't become law. A president uses a pocket veto, so there's no chance of an override. Congress, because of this, refused to seat the newly elected Tennessee congressman under Lincoln's plan. As we know, tragically, Lincoln is killed April 15th, 1865. And so the radical Republicans, their view is they want to punish the South and remake their society. So now Reconstruction falls onto Johnson. Johnson's own plan, he announced it in a speech May 29, 1865, was called the Restoration. Confederates had to swear an oath of loyalty, often personally to him. High-ranking Confederates, that planter class that used to think they were so high and mighty, now have to grovel at the president for forgiveness. I'm sure he took great joy in that. He appointed governors to form new state constitutions. He opposed black rights like citizenship and the right to vote, which were still possibilities with the coming of the 14th and 15th Amendments. And states had to ratify the 13th Amendment to re-enter the Union. All of this was done by the end of 1865. It's like, why did they even fight the war? All the old Confederates were back. It didn't look like anything had changed. And so Republicans in Congress didn't like this, and they wanted to take their own action. They wanted to shape Reconstruction themselves. That's all I have for today. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope you enjoyed this and learned something.